Millionaire dumps his sick dog, but a homeless man's act of kindness sparks a miracle. The rain fell steadily over the city streets, casting a cold, dreary blanket over everything it touched. Among the bustling traffic and hurried footsteps of downtown, there sat a man on a tattered blanket near a subway entrance. His name was Jack, a middle-aged man whose life had taken a turn for the worse after a series of unfortunate events. Clad in a weathered jacket and old boots, Jack sat with a small cup for change and a sign that read, "Just need a second chance." Before we continue with the video and dive deeper into the incredible story, I want to ask for your help. I'm aiming to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support would mean the world to me. If you've been enjoying this content, please hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. Jack's sharp, weary eyes scanned the streets as people passed by without a second glance. It wasn't the first day he'd gone unnoticed, but this day would prove different in a way he could never imagine. Across the street, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A tall man in an expensive suit emerged, holding the leash of a frail-looking golden retriever. The dog's coat, once a vibrant gold, was dull and patchy, and its steps were labored. The man, whom Jack recognized from the headlines as local millionaire Victor Danforth, unhooked the leash and shoved the dog away. "I don't have time for this anymore," Victor muttered, looking around briefly before stepping back into his car and speeding off. Jack's heart clenched as the dog stood motionless in the rain, confusion and exhaustion written all over its body. Without thinking, he grabbed the threadbare blanket that served as his makeshift bedding and rushed to the animal. "Hey there, buddy," Jack said softly, kneeling to the dog's level. The retriever flinched at first but didn't resist as Jack draped the blanket over its shivering frame. He gently scratched behind its ears, feeling the protruding bones beneath its coat. "You've had a rough go of it, haven't you?" The dog looked up at Jack with soulful brown eyes, a silent plea for help that Jack couldn't ignore. Despite his own circumstances, Jack couldn't bear to leave the animal in the rain. He reached for the small stash of food he had saved, a half-eaten sandwich, and offered it to the dog. It sniffed cautiously before wolfing it down. "You're coming with me," Jack murmured. He named the dog Lucky, though its condition was anything but. Jack led Lucky to a sheltered alcove near an abandoned storefront where they huddled together for warmth. Jack shared his blanket and used an old can to scoop water from a nearby puddle, ensuring Lucky drank enough to stay hydrated. As the hours passed, Lucky's initial fear began to fade, replaced by a quiet trust in the man who had saved him. "Why'd someone like that leave you behind?" Jack wondered aloud, stroking Lucky's head. He couldn't fathom how someone so wealthy could abandon such a beautiful animal. "Don't worry, you're not alone anymore." As the night deepened, Jack stayed awake, watching over Lucky. Despite the chill in the air and the growling of his own stomach, he felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Lucky stirred in his sleep, resting his head on Jack's lap as though to say, "Thank you." The next morning, Jack decided to seek help for Lucky. The dog was clearly sick, its labored breathing and matted fur a testament to prolonged neglect. Jack had no money for a vet, but he remembered a local animal shelter that sometimes offered assistance. Gathering his meager belongings, Jack set off with Lucky by his side. The journey to the shelter wasn't easy. Jack's legs ached from walking, and Lucky had to stop frequently to rest. Along the way, strangers cast pitying glances but offered no help. Still, Jack pressed on, determined to give Lucky a chance at recovery. When they finally reached the shelter, Jack hesitated at the entrance. He had always been proud, even in his hardest times, and asking for help didn't come easily. But one look at Lucky's tired eyes pushed him forward. Inside, a kind-faced woman named Emily greeted them. She was a volunteer at the shelter, her love for animals evident in the way she immediately crouched to examine Lucky. "He's in rough shape," she said gently, running her hands over the dog's thin frame. "But we'll do everything we can." Jack nodded, his throat tight. "I can't pay for anything," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But he deserves a chance." Emily looked at Jack with a mixture of admiration and sympathy. "Don't worry," she said firmly. "We'll take care of him. And thank you for bringing him here. You've already done more than most would." As Emily led Lucky to the back of the shelter for an examination, Jack lingered near the entrance, torn between hope and fear. He had grown attached to the dog in such a short time, and the thought of being separated from him felt like losing a part of himself. Still, he knew this was the best thing for Lucky. When Emily returned, she gave Jack an update. "Lucky's condition is serious but not hopeless. He's malnourished and has an infection, but with treatment he should recover." Jack exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. Emily hesitated before adding, "You know, we could use volunteers here. If you'd like, you could help out while Lucky recovers." Jack's eyes widened. The offer was unexpected, but it felt like a lifeline. "I'd like that," he said, his voice steady for the first time in a long while. As Jack stepped into the shelter's world of wagging tails and hopeful barks, he had no idea that this act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would not only change Lucky's life, but his own as well. Jack quickly settled into life at the shelter, finding solace in the simple yet meaningful work. His mornings began early, cleaning kennels, refilling water bowls, and feeding the animals. Though it was exhausting, Jack discovered a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for years. He felt a growing connection to the animals, each one with its own story of hardship and resilience. Lucky, meanwhile, was making remarkable progress. Under Emily's care, the once fragile golden retriever began to regain strength. His coat, though still patchy, started to show a healthy sheen, and his appetite returned in full force. Every time Jack visited Lucky in the recovery area, the dog's tail wagged furiously, and he would press his nose into Jack's hand, a silent expression of gratitude. "You've made a real difference for him," Emily said one afternoon as she watched Jack stroke Lucky's fur. "It's clear he feels safe with you." Jack nodded, his throat tight. "He's the one helping me," he replied. "I didn't think I could find this kind of connection again." Emily gave him a warm smile. Sometimes animals have a way of bringing out the best in us. Despite the progress, Lucky's recovery wasn't without its challenges. He still limped slightly on his hind leg, a reminder of the neglect he had endured, and his infections required careful monitoring. Jack spent every spare moment he had by Lucky's side, helping with his physical therapy and encouraging him to walk a little further each day. One morning, as Jack led Lucky outside for a short stroll, the dog suddenly froze, his ears perked and nose twitching. Jack followed his gaze and spotted a sleek black car idling across the street. His stomach churned as he recognized the vehicle. It was Victor Danforth's. The driver's side window rolled down, and Victor's cold gaze landed on Jack and Lucky. "You've got my dog," he said flatly, stepping out of the car. Jack's jaw tightened. "He's not your dog anymore," he replied, his voice firm but calm. "You abandoned him." Victor smirked. "I don't have time for a sick animal, but now that he's healthy, maybe I should take him back. He was worth a lot of money." Jack's blood boiled at the callous remark. "You didn't care about him when he was suffering. You left him to die." Victor's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Emily stepped out of the shelter, her arms crossed. "This is a private property," she said sharply, "and Lucky isn't going anywhere without a court order. Now, I suggest you leave." Victor hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Emily's defiance. With a dismissive wave, he returned to his car and sped off, leaving Jack and Emily seething in his wake. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," Emily said, placing a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder. "But don't worry, we'll make sure Lucky stays safe." Jack nodded, his heart still racing. The encounter had shaken him, but it also strengthened his resolve to protect Lucky at all costs. As the days turned into weeks, Jack and Lucky became inseparable. The bond they shared was undeniable, and it wasn't long before Jack began to consider a life beyond the shelter. Though he had come to love the work, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lucky deserved a permanent home, and Jack wanted to be the one to provide it. One evening, as they sat together in the shelter's courtyard, Jack broached the subject with Emily. "I've been thinking about adopting Lucky," he said hesitantly, "but I don't know if I'm in a position to give him the life he deserves." Emily's face lit up. "Jack, you've already proven that you're exactly what Lucky needs. You don't have to have a lot of money or a big house to be a good owner. All he needs is someone who loves him, and that's you." Jack's chest swelled with emotion. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope for a brighter future. The adoption process was straightforward, and within a week, Lucky was officially Jack's dog. The shelter staff gathered to celebrate, clapping and cheering as Jack signed the paperwork. Lucky, now a picture of health and happiness, barked joyfully, his tail wagging like a flag. "This is the start of something new for both of you," Emily said, handing Jack a small bag of supplies for Lucky. "I can't wait to see where life takes you." Jack smiled, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you for everything." Life with Lucky was an adjustment, but it was one Jack embraced wholeheartedly. They moved into a small apartment provided by a local housing initiative, a clean and modest space that felt like a palace compared to the streets. Jack found part-time work at a nearby diner, and though the hours were long, he always made time for Lucky. Every morning, they walked through the park, Lucky's boundless energy pulling Jack forward as they explored the trails. Jack often thought about how far they had come, from a rain-soaked street corner to a life filled with purpose and companionship. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. One afternoon, as Jack and Lucky strolled through the neighborhood, a man approached them with a friendly smile. "Excuse me," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Peter Grant. I run a local nonprofit that helps connect homeless individuals with job training and housing. I heard about what you did for Lucky, and I think you'd be a perfect fit for one of our programs." Jack blinked, taken aback. "I don't know what to say." Peter chuckled. "Say you'll think about it. People like you, compassionate, hard-working, you have so much to offer." Jack glanced down at Lucky, who was wagging his tail as though encouraging him to say yes. "I'll think about it," Jack said finally, a tentative smile spreading across his face. As they continued their walk, Jack couldn't help but marvel at the turn his life had taken. Lucky had brought him more than companionship. He had brought him hope and the promise of a second chance. And for Jack, that was nothing short of a miracle. A month had passed since Jack had been introduced to Peter Grant and his nonprofit. The transformation in Jack's life was undeniable. With Lucky by his side, he had enrolled in the job training program, learning valuable skills in carpentry and construction. The work was fulfilling, but what made it truly special was that Lucky often accompanied Jack to the workshops, becoming a beloved mascot among the team. "Looks like Lucky's got the work ethic to match yours," Peter joked one day, watching Lucky trot beside Jack, carrying a small tool pouch in his mouth. The sight drew laughter and applause from the group. Jack's cheeks reddened, but he couldn't help but laugh. "He's my partner in everything," he said, scratching Lucky behind the ears. "Don't think I'd have made it this far without him." While Jack built a stable life for himself, news of his bond with Lucky began to spread through the community. A local journalist who had heard about their story reached out, hoping to write a feature for the town's newspaper. Hesitant at first, Jack eventually agreed, seeing it as a way to shine a light on the shelter and the importance of rescuing animals in need. The article, titled "From Strays to Second Chances, The Story of Jack and Lucky," quickly gained attention. It wasn't long before people began recognizing Jack and Lucky during their morning walks or at the diner where Jack now worked full-time. "Hey, you're the guy from the paper," a woman exclaimed one morning as Jack poured her coffee. "What you did for that dog, it's amazing. Gives me hope for the world." Jack smiled shyly, unused to the attention. "Lucky saved me just as much as I saved him," he replied simply. Meanwhile, the article caught the eye of an unexpected reader, Victor Danforth. Sitting in his lavish penthouse, he read every word, his jaw tightening as the story unfolded. He had dismissed Lucky as a liability, a blemish on his carefully curated image. But seeing the dog's transformation and the impact he had on Jack's life stirred something Victor wasn't used to feeling: guilt. Unable to shake the story from his mind, Victor decided to visit the shelter. When he walked through the doors, Emily greeted him with cautious professionalism. "Mr. Danforth," she said, her tone clipped, "what can we do for you?" I read the article about Jack and Lucky," Victor began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I wanted to see if there's anything I can do to help the shelter." Emily raised an eyebrow. "You abandoned Lucky when he needed you most. Why the sudden change of heart?" Victor shifted uncomfortably. "I made a mistake," he admitted. "I've made a lot of mistakes. But reading about what Lucky and Jack have achieved, it made me realize I can do better." Emily studied him for a long moment before nodding. "If you're serious about helping, we could always use funding for medical supplies and shelter renovations. But understand this, Your actions have consequences. You can't undo the harm, but you can make amends. Victor nodded solemnly. I'll make arrangements immediately. True to his word, Victor donated a substantial sum to the shelter, covering veterinary bills and funding a much-needed expansion. He even began volunteering on weekends, though his awkward attempts at cleaning kennels often drew chuckles from the staff. Jack was initially wary when he learned of Victor's involvement, but over time he saw a change in the man who had once abandoned Lucky. Victor seemed genuinely remorseful, and his actions spoke louder than words. I owe you and Lucky an apology, Victor said one afternoon as they crossed paths at the shelter. I didn't deserve him, but I'm glad he found someone who did. Jack nodded, his expression softening. It's not about deserving, it's about doing better. Lucky taught me that. As Jack and Lucky's story continued to inspire, Peter approached Jack with an idea. We've been thinking about starting an animal-assisted therapy program, Peter said one evening. With your experience and Lucky's incredible story, I think you'd be the perfect person to lead it. Jack's eyes widened. You think I could do that? Peter grinned. I know you can. You've already seen how much animals can change lives. Imagine what you and Lucky could do for people who need hope. The thought filled Jack with excitement and purpose. He accepted the offer, and within weeks, he and Lucky were training to become certified in animal-assisted therapy. The program launched shortly after, focusing on helping veterans, children, and individuals facing trauma. Lucky's gentle nature and Jack's empathetic approach quickly made the program a success. One day, as Jack and Lucky prepared for a session with a group of children, Emily visited the center. She watched as Lucky calmly interacted with the kids, allowing them to pet his fur and even perform simple tricks with him. You've come a long way, Jack, Emily said, her voice filled with pride. It's amazing to see what you've built. Jack smiled, glancing at Lucky. He's the real hero, he said. He gave me a second chance, and now we get to do the same for others. The program's impact was profound, touching countless lives and forging a legacy of hope and resilience. For Jack, it was a daily reminder of how far he had come, from a man with nothing to someone making a difference. And for Lucky, every wag of his tail, every joyful bark was a testament to the power of love, compassion, and second chances. Their journey together had begun in despair, but it had blossomed into something extraordinary, a life full of purpose, connection, and a bond that could never be broken.